Okay, well, I've seen a number of new faces in the audience, so I will introduce myself. My name is Jean-François Quéron. I usually go by JF because some find that my first name is too long. I don't know why. I've been a consultant in something or other most of my life, my professional life, but I started working with BusinessObjects in 1994. And basically have been doing that ever since. In 2015, I created Sagitta BI. In case you wonder, Sagitta means arrow in Latin, and I could spend another half hour explaining why we chose that name, but fortunately we don't have that kind of time. What we do, we obviously focus around business objects, but I like to say that we fix things. That's what we're good at. I mean, we'll help with administration. We'll help with troubleshooting, obviously, since this is the subject of this presentation. We also do all sorts of developments around the SDKs that are offered with BusinessObjects. There's also a long conversation we could have on the different components, different APIs we can use around the BusinessObjects ecosystem, and you know, we do a lot with that. But for today, I would like to cover the notion of troubleshooting, and I'm going to be pretty wide in the coverage here. And obviously, we will focus a little bit on the BusinessObjects platform, but I think the concepts that we will talk about here really apply to anything that is a system, okay? So you know about Murphy's laws, right? The main law is if anything can go wrong, it will at the worst possible time, but there are a few corollaries of that law. If nothing can go wrong, it will still go wrong, okay? You've seen that. If several things can go wrong, the one causing the most damage will. If everything's going well, something's wrong, okay? And of course, my favorite, the patch for your problem will be in the next release. Raise your hand if you've never seen that. Okay, so the foundation of our discussion here is that problems are a given. You will have a problem sooner or later. Those are human-made systems. They're imperfect, and something will happen. Now, the severity, so how much is broken, how bad it's broken, but also the urgency will vary depending on your context, your specific situation. So we want to prepare for them, and to do that, we have to assess what our responsibilities are. And this is something I will kind of go fast over because we don't have a lot of time, but it's something that is really important in my perspective. And of course, the second aspect, how are we going to fix it? Okay, definitely we want to resolve that problem. So I use the term or the acronym SLA here kind of loosely. I mean, it will have different names in different organizations, but the concept here is that we should have some sort of an agreement in place about our responsibilities. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail, but again, I won't spend a lot of time on that. And so we should have a plan or a method to approach those problems that will inevitably appear. Okay, so quickly, and maybe in the Q&A after, you may want to share something about what you do in your organization. But this is how I think of a service agreement. So the key here is that it's a contract. It's something that you decide ahead of time, and it's a contract between you, whoever manages the system, and the business community, your end users. And it will vary depending on your line of business, the criticality of the systems you're dealing with. A lot of factors will come into play here. So in a nutshell, we will describe what the service is, what's the tool we're talking about. We will document the standards. We will specify the duration of the service. Is it available all the time or not? Roles and responsibilities, and evaluation criteria. Okay, how do we decide when everything is fine or not? Okay, so we will establish what kind of hardware, software, what people we have available, what time frame is available. Again, I'm speaking here in very general terms because the details will vary a lot between environments. Okay, but why is it important to have that in place? But I think it's really a win-win. Okay, you protect yourself from unreasonable expectations, and at the same time, it protects your business users. They know that you are committed to doing the right thing for them by contract. Okay, so we cover our behind, and also we give a warm, fuzzy feeling to our end users. Okay, a few bullet points. Again, I'm going to go very fast over that, but one thing is that you want to be specific. Okay, don't just say, yeah, we're going to fix it if it's broken. Well, that's too vague, and it's going to come back and bite you anyway. Or you can actually dodge your responsibilities using that, but that doesn't work too well, actually. So you want time frames. Okay, is it a 24/7 coverage? Is it 9 to 5 weekdays? Whatever the case may be. Have numbers in there. You know, you guarantee a percentage of capacity. How many users minimum will be able to get on the system? Whatever. Okay, and be clear. Make any exclusions. You know, say, well, you know, these reports in that folder are not considered critical. We are not handling them. Your favorites folder, for example, that's your responsibility. We'll just have a backup, but we're not responsible for fixing that if it doesn't work, for example. Okay? And review that. Whatever contract you have in place, the circumstances will change over time. So revisit it. Okay? Go back to the table, maybe yearly, maybe after a migration, generally speaking, ongoing as needed. Go back to the negotiating table and make sure it's still up to date, that it really serves the purpose. Well, this sounds like a funny question, right? What is a problem? Everybody knows what a problem is, but let's try and be a little bit more specific. And again, that will be part of your contract. These are random bullet points of problems that can happen. We cannot open the admin application. We cannot navigate folders. Okay? We cannot refresh any reports. We cannot refresh a specific report. The bottom bullet point is really the definition we're looking for. It's anything users tell you they cannot do, but think they should be able to. Well, does that sound reasonable to you? Not necessarily, right? It's whatever they think they should be able to do. Well, it's still a problem because they will come to you with that problem, and that's where your contract comes into place. And you can shoot back and say, you know, you read the fine print, right? We said we're not doing that. But it is interesting. Okay. that was, yeah, it's a self-solving problem. It's a kind I love. But again, yeah, a problem is whenever the expectations of the end users are not met. It may not even be a technical problem, actually, but we will focus on that. Okay. Now, once the problem occurs, and this is one of my big pain points, is how to identify the real problem. And the first thing is to get a detailed, it's in bold for a reason, or in capitals, description of the problem. And that in itself is always an issue. How many times have I, got an email or a phone call saying, BusinessObjects is not working? And that's it. And now you have to, start torturing them until they really give up the true explanation of their problem. And it may happen that it has nothing to do with business objects, it's a data problem, whatever. But that's the problem with most end users. And I'm working continuously with one customer in particular, where inevitably they give me a modified name of the report they have a problem with without giving me the folder. And it takes me just 15 minutes just to try and identify which report they're talking about. Okay, so that is a challenge. That is a challenge, getting an actual detailed description of the issue, the error message, the workflow they were following. They tell you this report does not give the right result, and you try it. Yes, it does. Well, they were using specific parameters. That is really key. Getting the whole story before you even try to troubleshoot. And it's not in our instinct, right? We're told there's a problem with that. We just want to dive in and just fix it. Well, it doesn't work well that way. So, this is a funny one. Time of day. Well, that may matter. I've seen things that work during the night and not during the day. There's usually a very rational reason for that, but it's not necessarily obvious. Okay, so this is where we will get in more of the details. And what I want to say, and I think I mentioned that in starting, is that this approach really applies to anything. Okay, this will approach to troubleshooting business objects. It will apply to troubleshooting a program that you have written. It will apply to finding the problem in your car, if you like to working on your car. It's the same approach, or a very similar approach, to what doctors use to diagnose what you have. Troubleshooting is a very, very broad subject, so we will apply that to business objects, but it's more of a state of mind, more of a mental process than an actual, specific technique. So, identify and resolve. Those are two steps. Okay, we cannot fix if we don't identify the problem, and we will use a certain strategy. The strategy will probably vary with maybe not everyone, but with each time you're trying to troubleshoot a problem. You will approach it differently. So we will document that strategy because we can reuse it. Okay, if we have a similar situation later on, we can reuse the same strategy. We have to understand, because we're talking specifically about business objects, we have to understand the process flows. We have to understand how the different components hook together. Okay, same thing if you're troubleshooting a car, you have to understand the basic components to understand where the problem may be. Another one that's very dear to me is replicate the problem, if applicable, with demo samples. If you think it's a more systemic problem, if you think it's your platform that is not working right, use demo samples to reproduce the problem. For two reasons. First of all, samples are simple, so it's more obvious that the problem is with the whole system and not with your very complex document with 19 data providers and 16 reports, which is a case I had yesterday. But also, if you have to escalate the problem to technical support, SAP technical support in this case, you can tell them, well, I'm using your samples, and this is what I'm getting. That helps. Okay? We'll use the best practices to resolve the problem, to fix it. And again, we will document every step of the way what we have done. That also is key. Okay? We'll come back to that, but don't just do stuff and then whether it works or if it's worse, you don't know what you've done. So keep track of all the steps you take and their outcome, better or worse. So that's why the emphasis, do this. Okay, so how do we track the fault? It's, in most cases, I'd be tempted to say all cases, but I'm being careful. It is going to be a process of elimination. You will look at what works and what doesn't, and from that you may able to determine which piece is broken. So we have a few things we can check up front, right? That will be, I would say, some of your go-tos. Verify the connectivity for the repository. Take a quick look. Are any of the servers, different modules, are they running? And we will talk about the process flows in just a minute. Connectivity, do you have access to your database? Is BusinessObjects properly integrated with its web environment? I mean, did you upgrade Tomcat if you have a separate web system, or if you're using something else than Tomcat? Is it properly configured? Was there an upgrade? And SQL itself, right? You can extract, in most cases, the SQL from your web intelligence or your Crystal document, or Desky if you still have that, and run them in a different environment. So look at all the different pieces and try to locate where the issue is. So we will run different tests to try and locate where in the whole system, we were dealing with a fairly complex system already, where in which component the issue is occurring. So we can run test schedules. We can run test interactive viewing in InfoView, or the Launchpad, actually. It's still an old statement here. And all the different viewing options, right? We still have, in Webby, we have the choice between the Java viewer and now the HTML5, which is favored. We also have the Webby Rich client. Does it work in one and not in the other? Again, an issue I had just yesterday. Everything works except in the BI Launchpad. And we'll go through the different process flows, as I mentioned before, and we'll try to identify where it breaks. We'll talk about the logs later, and basically we'll find the cause, but we need to understand the moving parts. This is an old picture, but it's still valid in concept. This is BusinessObjects version 3, because I didn't find a more recent one, but this is really what the system looks like. You have a central management server. You have a repository or system database with an audit database. And then around that, you have a bunch of other components that fulfill a certain function, a certain feature of the system. Okay? We have, well, the web application server here. We have somewhere a web intelligence processing server, Crystal. We have our databases, relational or multidimensional. This is what it looks like. It's a very complex system, and just by looking at it, you cannot figure out what's going wrong. But actually, if you go down to the basic level, it becomes fairly simple to understand. Okay? You see a few arrows there. This is just an example of one process. It's just a logon process. Well, it looks complex. There's a lot of arrows, But once you follow the workflow, it's very simple. On the web client, which would be your browser, you have a login screen. You type a user ID and password if you use enterprise login. That is going through the web server, and the web application server is passed to the CMS that validates that against the system database. If it's valid, it returns through the application an OK, and your screen displays that you are logged in. In reality, there's a little more that happens after that, but you get the idea. Okay, you have 5 different components that are involved, but the logic is very simple. If you try to get that, at a glance, it's panicking. So I showed you just one workflow, login. Okay? Typical workflows involve certain specific components in order to give you the result you're looking for. And understanding that will help you immensely in troubleshooting. Okay? 3 examples here. Viewing an instance of a Crystal report that was refreshed previously. Viewing a Webby document on demand, interactively, refreshing interactively. Running a scheduled Crystal report. Well, those 3 sound fairly similar in concept, but actually involve different components, different servers in your business object system. And identifying what works, okay, this is another view of the same concept, understanding what works and what doesn't will help you pinpoint which one of those components may be defective. Okay, again here, simplified view. You have a page cache server that's for Crystal. You have the web server, you have web intelligence, you have the file repository server, you have the CMS, you have the system database, and you have plenty of other things. Okay, I'll try not to be too specific here, but this is an example of the different components that are used for a specific workflow. This is viewing a Crystal report. Okay, CMS, because you have to identify the report. You have the output file repository server, so the files, I don't know if you're all familiar with that, but you really have 2 folders where your documents may be stored. The output one is where the instances, anything that has been refreshed ahead of time, will be stored. So if we want to view a Crystal instance, we need to log in, we need to retrieve that document from there, and it will go through the page and cache server. The cache will go through the web server, and you will see it on your screen. Okay, that is for a Crystal. Now, if we are viewing, which one would this be? That's viewing a web intelligence report interactively. You have your input file repository. You still have the CMS, the web server. We have data because we're refreshing interactively. And of course, it's going to be the web intelligence processing server. This is simplified, of course, but you get the gist of it. Now, I'll stop there for 1 second. Actually, no, and this is the 3rd scenario. This is executing, well, it's a desky, it's a bad example because, does anyone here still use desktop intelligence? No? Good. It's still out there. It's still out there. But replace that with Crystal instead of desky, or Webby for that matter. This is executing a report in batch, refreshing, scheduling a report. Okay, CMS handles that. There's a job server, the adaptive job server in the 4.0 environment, and we get the report from the input file repository, and the result is stored there. 3 examples of completely different workflows, but they do have certain components in common, and that will be the key for you to troubleshoot it. Okay, so basically we will know what's working and what's not. Can we view an instance? Can we create an instance? Can we view interactively? Okay, so we will know which is working and which is not, and based on that we will work by elimination. Okay, there are things that are common to the ones that are failing. There are things that are common to the ones that are working, and by combining all that, we will be able to figure out what is breaking. But what's important, as you're identifying the different pieces that may break, just fix one at a time. Even if you think that multiple things are broken, which is not uncommon, only change one thing at a time. Why? Because you want to make sure that you identify what fixed it, especially for the next time, but also because some problems may be recurring, and you have to be able to make sure that you actually fix the problem. But that's a key, okay? Don't just do stuff and wow, it's working. Okay, but why? Why is it working? Well, you have no idea. So that's why you have to be systematic and do one thing at a time. Okay, so this is what I was explaining earlier. In this example, you have 3 workflows, 1 with a red X, 2 with a green check mark. We see that what's common between the first and the third one is the output file repository. One of them works, so that's not the problem. Okay. Between the first and the second, well, the web server is common to both. One of them is working. That's not our problem. But what's unique to the top one is the page and cache server. That's probably what's broken. And then we can focus on those different components. And again, this is an example for business objects, but think of any system. There will be different components. Some things will work, some won't. What's common with what's not working? What's common with what is working? Okay, this is a similar example, except 2 of them are breaking. And what's common between the 2 is that output file repository server. That's probably what's broken. Okay? Now, we're talking in very generic terms here. Well, what tools do we have? What sources of information do we have to identify let's say, the bottom line of our problem? Okay? The log files. There is a specific location in the whole folder structure of business objects. It's a folder called logging, a few levels down, that will have a log file pretty much for every server, every component that is running in your system. Those log files are actually pretty hard to read, but with a little bit of experience, you can do some textual search and find some errors that are meaningful. Unfortunately, those log files are typically full of errors that are meaningless. Okay, that's the nature of the beast. I don't know why it's like that, but there's a lot of errors that you can overlook and that are there all the time. Also, once you have narrowed down the list of servers or components that may be failing, activate the trace for them if necessary. It may actually be required by SAP Tech Support. If you have to escalate the problem with them, they will ask you to turn on certain traces to collect that. But again, those trace files may be hard to read, but with a little bit of experience, and again, using the search, you may be able to locate something that's meaningful to your particular problem. So the business objects repository is actually a composite. It's made of the system database that contains all the metadata for your system, things like user IDs and their encrypted passwords. The folder structure that you see when you're in the Launchpad or in the CMC does not exist physically on the file system. It's just a concept, and that is stored in the system database. Your actual Webby documents, your actual Crystal documents, your actual universes are stored as files on a file structure that is completely different from that logical structure that you see. And that is the input and the output file repository. And the whole of that forms the business objects repository. And you can imagine immediately that there is a synchronization that needs to exist between the metadata and the actual physical files. There are references or pointers, if you will, between the two. And it is not uncommon after the system has been running for a while and has crashed a few times that you start seeing discrepancies between the two. Business Objects comes with a tool called the Repository Diagnostic Tool, or RDT, and it does all that. It scans the system database and compares it with the actual physical location of the files, and will detect any discrepancies. Files that are there but do not belong to anything in the system database, or vice versa. There's a file that's referenced there and does not physically exist. But also a number of discrepancies within the actual system database. Okay? It's pretty efficient. It's actually able to repair a number of inconsistencies. Typically, you will lose some data, but at least it fixes your system and it documents what it has fixed. Obviously, you want to do that only after completing a backup, also after a restore.
Real quick on that, I know that in the past, I seem to remember that we would only run that tool like after we tried everything else. It was like an absolute last chance kind of thing because it felt like it sometimes messed things up. Is that better now, or do you feel like this is because it feels kind of last chance kind of thing?
Well, yes and no. So Ethan's question is, yeah, at what point of severity do we do that? First of all, the tool is much better these days. It has many more functions. Second, there is a repair and a non-repair mode. So you can run it first as just an investigative mode, and it will just spit out a report, which is not a bad thing to have as part of your scheduled management. You know, once a month, you run the diagnostic of your repository just to make sure that nothing is, slipping away from you. If you have 2 errors and you have, 5,000 documents and instances in your system, you can probably safely ignore that. If you see the number of errors creeping up, maybe there's a problem and you need to take care of it. So that's one part of the answer. The second part of the answer is yes, it's kind of dangerous because it goes and modifies your repository, but it's much better. I mean, I've seen pretty good success in the later, I would say since 4.1. It's pretty good at that. But regardless, to your point, there's a danger. Every time you run an automated tool that fixes something, you want to have a backup as before the fix because yes, it could go out of hand. So thank you for the question. I mean, it's actually very, very relevant. And use it on a system that's offline. Turn off Business Objects and run the repository tool for the simple reason that if you have a live system, it may make changes on the fly and confuse the heck out of your repository tool. Hey, wait, that file was not there a second ago. So you have to do that on a stopped system. I'm not talking about the diagnostics because, again, that doesn't hurt much and you have a few errors because of timing, no big deal. But if you're trying to make a fix, it has to be on a stopped system. Okay. So I've updated the path. Obviously, I don't expect you to memorize that. It's in the documentation somewhere. And you can always ask. So this is an example of the things that it fixes. You have a folder, a document that's supposed to have a parent folder. You can't find a parent folder. The document is orphan. invalid owner ID, invalid calendar. I mean, those are just examples and of the things that can be found within the repository. And then inconsistencies between the physical file storage and the repository. Other examples, the file exists, but it's not in the repository. It's in the repository, but it does not exist physically. Size is wrong. You have empty folders. That's also something that it cleans automatically. Okay? And then you have other sources of information, obviously. You have documentation. You have the error guides, product guides, release notes, and of course the knowledge base. I have to say, over the years, the SAP knowledge base has gotten much better. We used to actually make fun of it and say we were much better going to user forums than try to use a knowledge base. It's no longer the case. I've had a lot of success with that, and there's a number of forums still mentioned for nostalgics. The Bob user forum, it's still out there. I don't know who remembers Bob. That dates us, guys.
Is it still used?
There's activity. I mean, I get a daily index of it, but I have to admit I haven't been on it for too long. Okay. Now, in conclusion, we're reaching our time. When is the problem fixed? Again, sounds like a funny question, but we have to remove the code. Sometimes just a reboot is what was needed. Parameters that are wrong, we have to apply a patch. Or, why not? Not very frequent, but just remove the function. Just tell users, no, you can't do that. That's not how it's designed to work. Don't do it. Don't have 25 data providers in one Webby. They will still try to do it, but it doesn't work too well.